Hey, Brent Pourciau here at TopVelocity.net. Thanks for watching the video. If you haven't already, subscribe, follow me. I'm also looking at video. If you want me to break down some of your video, you can send me pitching mechanics, throwing mechanics, even hitting. We'll break it down for you from a biomechanical standpoint and give you some good feedback. You can go to TopVelocity.net, grab the phone number on there and text us right to that number. I'll send you my analysis. Hopefully that helps. Also, too, follow us on social media, wherever you find us, because we're always putting out the best information we can. I'm always putting out a lot of science. If you haven't seen this, I've been posting a lot of cool scientific studies that are third party that I've found in my own research, and I like to get it out there, educate the baseball world on all the great information that's always coming out. So stay connected with us if you want to keep learning. Also, you want to get into our training systems or come down to our training camps, live and train here in our headquarters in Louisiana, or just get our training online. We even have some great innovative training products. Go to topvelocity.com. You can see a lot of those. But just in this little video here, I want to just go over some good information and answer some questions. If you want some of your questions answered, just post them here in the comments. Hopefully on the next time I do this, I'll answer your questions right out of the comments. Here's a good one to start off with. It says, should I shut down from all throwing in the off season at all? If so, for how long? Get that question a lot. What's an off season? Off season is a time away from competitive play. Ideally, you're trying to take 3 to 4 months off at least. It actually makes you healthier. Studies show if you are competitively playing, specifically pitching, more than 8 months out of the year, you're 5 times more likely to have injuries. So we need that time to recover and rebuild. You know, it really kind of goes into the essence of when you look at throwing and throwing related injury. We know in baseball we have a pattern of injury. There's a real high probability that you're going to injure a shoulder and an elbow in your career, and even seriously injure it where you might have to have surgery. I tore my rotator cuff at 18 years old, had to have surgery. So it's what led to this program, led to my success. And really, you know, a lot of times people are made from adversity. That was the adversity that made me. But if you're going to avoid that, we really got to understand that throwing is really what leads to the injury. Now, you can do things to give yourself more stamina in your ability to throw. You know, like they say, you only have so many bullets in your gun. That's kind of true, but you can change that. You can add a little more. You can take more away based on how you take care of your body and how you take care of the game. So a good place to start with that is understanding just an important concept, because if you look at injury is the highest when it comes to fatigue. For example, if you're throwing fatigued, you're 36 times more likely to have injury. So if that's the highest risk of injury, throwing fatigued, then we've got to be careful with throwing. You know, you hear this thing from coaches a lot, just throwing strength in your arm. You got to answer that question. I think a lot of coaches would tell you, yes, throwing strength into your arm, but you've got to answer that question. And I'll just throw the data at you. If you think throwing strength into your arm, we got to look at the science. Is the science showing us that that is true, or is it not true? So this one collection of studies here basically looks at the risk factors of throwing. So basically it says if you regularly pitch with fatigue, that's where this came from. And this one study said you were 36 times more likely to have injury. And if you pitch more than 8 months out of the year, you were 5 times more likely to injury. The other one I talked about, but it keeps going. Greater than 80 pitches per game, you're almost 4 times more likely to have injury. If your fastball's over 85, almost 3 times. If you pitched in more than 100 innings in a year, you're almost 4 times more likely to have injury. If you played both pitcher and catcher, 2.7 times, almost 3 times. If you participated in a showcase, almost 8 times more likely you're going to have an injury. If you participate in concurrent leagues, meaning 2 leagues at one time, you're over 5 times more likely to have injury. And if you play travel ball, almost 5 times more likely to have injury. So if injury becomes at higher risk, the more I throw, then how does throwing strengthen your arm? Doesn't make any sense, right? Typically, where do you do something and you get stronger, but your risk of injury goes higher? That rarely is the case. What is happening is the more you're throwing, the more it's fatigue. That's why all those components, the values that added or increased the risk of injury was all related to basically reps, right? How many times I threw in a year, how many innings, how many pitches in one game, how many months of the year These are all reps. So it's basically saying the higher the reps, the higher the risk of injury, because the one key risk is the fatigue. So does throwing strengthen your arm? That's a tough, well, that's a double-edged sword. Yes, I could probably find ways where it strengthens your arm. For example, initially, you know, the strength gains of your arm having to get stronger at stability to handle the internal acceleration. You getting better at syncing it up and putting together could be a sign of strength. And that occurs, and that's why you get those little velocity gains when you start throwing. But then eventually that plateaus out, and then it starts to deteriorate, because that's when we start moving closer to fatigue. So over time, you'd have to say throwing does not strengthen your arm. Actually, it weakens your arm through fatigue, which makes it more vulnerable to injury. So therefore, if throwing is kind of the initial, strength is kind of the initial response to throwing, we have to be very careful with that, understanding that throwing strengthens your arm, and more than likely, it's probably safer to say it doesn't. So if we're saying it doesn't, then we've got to be careful when we throw, how often we throw, at what intensity we throw, what effort, once again, because all this is driving fatigue. And then we got to do better things of strengthening. That's why a great tool of assessing health in your arm is like the arm care device. You can go to topvelocity.net/arm care and get it. It's a dynamometer, test your arm strength. Because if you're testing your arm strength and your arm strength is down, there's a good chance it's weak and it can't handle the stress. And you're going to find the more you throw, a lot of times that drives the strength down, that weakens the arm. So if you're assessing it through strength as opposed to pitch count, it's a much better way to make sure you're not injuring your arm. But still, that goes along the lines of the more we throw, we make our arm more vulnerable to injury. So we do need to conserve when we throw, and that means in the off season, it's probably not good that we throw high intent or a lot if it's high stress. And then two, it's if it's fatigue is the problem, how do we throw without building closer to fatigue or also causing more breakdown through fatigue? And that means we shouldn't throw as much in the off season. So it'd be good to pull back on throwing in the off season. Definitely throw lower stress. Definitely not competitive, because if you looked at it, a lot of the competitive play was increasing the risk, because more than likely it's on a higher intensity, a higher adrenaline form of throwing. For example, throwing in 2 leagues, throwing in a showcase, playing travel ball, all those were high correlations to throwing injury. So getting out of competitive play reduces the stress, which reduces the fatigue problem. So that's why in the off season, let's get out of competition. Let's try to do lower stress throwing, which we typically do at Top Velocity is more resistance throwing, which means we put ourselves in challenging positions to make it harder to throw, forcing us to work on our issues in the kinetic chain, which typically aren't the arm. It's typically the legs, the hips, the trunk. And then that way we're not putting the high velocities on our arm, and therefore we can do more reps with less fatigue. That's really the key in the off season. Let's find a way to do reps with less fatigue. That's also why we use a medicine ball approach. We use a two-handed, 2-pound medicine ball because it doesn't put the fatigue on the throwing arm, because you're not going into the high-speed torques of external interpretation. So therefore we can work through the similar movements using more of the legs and core than the arm. So we're developing more of the kinetic chain without putting the added stress on the arm. It's such a better way to train in the off season. So it's not like just not throw in the off season, because then we lose the muscle memory, we lose the sequencing, the coordination of actually throwing efficiently, which is healthy. So it is actually healthy. We maintain and improve how our central nervous system, how our body coordinates movement. So then when we do start to throw a lot, we have more efficiency in the way we throw, and that puts less stress on each throw. Once again, helping us deal with the fatigue issue. And then we just make sure it's programmed to we're not overdoing it. I tell guys in the off season, if you're sore, don't throw baseball today. Throw med balls. Don't throw the baseballs. And typically, because like the med balls it's fine throwing with soreness of med balls because it's not this real high speed loading of your joints that you're doing like with a little bitty baseball. So it's a much healthier way to do it. And then that way too, you're not putting a lot of fatigue on the arms, so you can go in the weight room and actually build a lot of strength. It's hard to build high levels of elite athletic strength in the weight room if your arms are constantly fatigued and beat down, because you typically hold the bar on pretty much everything you do. So you don't have that fatigue in your arms, so you can go out and hold the bar and you feel strong enough to be able to work through your lifts. So yeah, let's throw in the off season, but do like we do at Top Velocity. Do it in low stress throwing, pretty much like 3 days a week, not that often, mixing in with a lot of med ball work, so it's less loads and torques on the arm and more challenges through the kinetic chain. And let's enhance the problems. Like your off season, it's not about you having the stamina to throw all those innings we do in the season. So it's not about keeping the stamina or the endurance on the arm. It's about fixing the problems that cause the inefficiency in your delivery that led to more fatigue while throwing, which made you more vulnerable to injury. Also, less ability to be consistent and throw command well, or even keep your velocity consistent where it wasn't fluctuating all over the place. Let's work on those kinetic chain issues. That's why we're going to work on mobility. Do I have, can I improve my hip mobility? So my hips work better in the sequence of movements on the mound, like better pelvis to trunk control and transfer of energy. And then 2, use the drills, low stress drills, to help us teach that now that I'm improving that through my mobility. And then 2, let's go in the weight room and let's get stronger in, say, the hip capsule or the ankle, where I can have more stability, more control in my lower half, where I'm not just dumping my upper body and dragging my arm. I'm actually more in control of my center of mass, and I'm better moving it down the mound and better transferring energy through my hips and shoulder because I'm strengthening my pelvis, I'm strengthening my lower leg, I'm strengthening my core, I'm strengthening my spine. And then I'm also with the mobility improvements, I'm able to move energy through it better. So I'm creating a more flow of power through my body. All this is the off-season training. So when I get to season, I'm more efficient. I reduce stress better. I can handle more stress because of it. I can throw at higher speeds because of it without it leading to high levels of fatigue, which make me more vulnerable to injury. So I hope that's a long-winded discussion of injury, but I think that's a lot of the failures we see. I'm going to kind of stay on that topic here because it's such a good topic. And I think this is the failure we even see in professional organizations. The point is, I see this problem not just in high school, little league. I see college, major college, minor league, major league. I literally see it all the way to the top, where organizations literally have no concept of stress, real injury management, because they have huge components of it either not in their system or not intertwined or interfaced together with the whole system that well. And that's why you see these orgs with like devastating injury in their pitching staff, where they'll have, half their pitching staff gone 3 months into the season of injury, and they're just basically spending tons and tons of money just constantly buying guys, throwing guys away. So it's like, I don't understand why these orgs spend so much money on these high-level players, and then they have a poor developed system to manage their workloads and their stress to keep them healthy, keep their value. It's mind-blowing. Why spend so much money to get the player and then not spend money well in the developmental process to keep them the player that you paid for? Mind-blowing. And I've seen it get better, but it's still not even close. And it's because of the failure across the board. For example, we just talked about it. If you're going to be healthy, or you're going to say, I'm going to look at it now from the standpoint of a coach and a staff. If I'm going to keep a staff healthy, or even a whole team healthy, I'm going to have checks and balances the whole year, and I'm going to always be running those checks and balances every single day. For example, I'm going to have an evaluation process of understanding joint mobility, joint strength and health. I could even have a medical evaluation of edema and supplementation and basically how well is that joint recovering post trauma and post playing. I'm going to have evaluations of sequencing of biomechanical components and checkpoints that are key foundational movements that must occur to keep the efficiency in the movement. I'm going to make sure those are evaluated and being applied well and across the board. So I'm going to have this full evaluation of how the athlete is performing every day. And I might have to meticulously do it every day, but I'm going to make sure I'm evaluating the key things to make sure those things aren't breaking down. And I'm going to make sure they're being maintained. I'm going to bring awareness to the athlete that these things are being maintained or not being maintained. I'm going to make, changes in their everyday training, their programming to fix the issues or the things that are breaking down, and also make sure initially up front going into their season that they have all of the components in place to maintain these key parts of the athlete. The mobility checkpoints with the mobility training, the strength, speed, power checkpoints with the strength, speed, power training. I'm going to have the biomechanical, the drills that they're going through or that we're applying to help make sure they are hitting these checkpoints. And then when they are breaking down, the drills that we're going to use to try to maintain and get them back in balance or to the level that we find adequate. Every day, we got to make sure that the athlete is going through those routines, is being assessed on how well those routines are working, and making sure that even going through the routines, that the evaluating how each component is performing. And they're going to basically have this process, this developmental process going all the time. So that way we can alleviate injury, or we can really push down the risk of high injury, because we're aware of the health of the athlete, the health of the skill, how well it's being performed, and we can see when any change occurs. So we can catch the change before it becomes a problem, before it basically manifests into an injury or manifests into poor performance. We can catch it. We have protocol in place to work on it. Once we catch it, to get it back into balance or back to level. And then we're just going to keep this process the whole time. So if your players aren't in a kind of system like this, and your staff is in a kind of system like this, they're high performance and they're being used pretty frequently due to the demands of competition, it's just almost, you can guarantee that there's going to be a percentage that's going to be unhealthy. Specifically, if you have protocol on top of their competition that is also high stress that you have in there. Like when I hear these organizations putting these guys into high, amounts of volume in long tossing or even in weighted ball training, now you have these high stressors in your training outside of competitive play that almost has to be considered competitive also volume, and could be causing more of the problems that are already happening in the competitive play. That's why you've got to make sure that their everyday work and training for these staffs does not have any high stress training that would match or even be greater than competitive play. It has to be completely, only thing allowed would be all the protocol to monitoring health and the core principles of health, and making sure that there's the protocol in place to maintain that and to apply that when things start to break down. So I know that's really complex and it sounds complex, but that's a developmental system. And the reason I'm delivering it to you this way, because it's not something I just came up with. We've been doing that at TopVelocity for almost 20 years. We've had this developmental system in place. All the athletes are being taught that and brought through that and trained that way. And the athletes that have come out of here and gone through professional baseball, high-level D1 baseball, Major League Baseball, have that protocol in place. That's why we have so much success and such a low rate of injury with our athletes, is because this is how they're managing their careers. And this is how every org should be managing their careers. And it's crazy to see that this still hasn't been the case with the majority at this point, with all the great information, the science and the technology that we have. And I couldn't stress this enough. Every Division I, any coach that has the means to do this needs to do this. It's only going to improve the value of your team, success of your team, and the value of your players, and maintain the value of your players. So I hope you got some good insight out of this. If you have any questions on this, please ask them. I'd love to help you and give you more insight on it. If it was just a lot of information too chaotic, go check out some of my more simple clips, my X and check clips, and then before you really try to dive into these really complex conversations. and just start to learn little bits and pieces, because this is a master's, a PhD knowledge of information that we've developed here at TopVelocity to build out this insane developmental system to get the kind of results that we get. And if you want to learn more, TopVelocity.net, TopVelocity.com. Follow us on social media, ask more questions. I hope this helps you guys a lot. Looking forward to doing this again. We'll see you soon.